Writing Comics. Lecture 1, Whys and Wherefores, in which I basically introduce myself in the course and provide a summary of what we'll be covering. Hey, I'm author Stefan Petruga. I've written over 20 books for major publishers and hundreds of stories for comics and graphic novels, some of which you may have heard of, some of which you may not, but I'd really like it if you had. For several years now, I've been teaching online courses through the University of Massachusetts, including this one, which, as you might guess from the title, is specifically geared toward learning how to write comics. Why would I want to teach writing comics? Partly because, well, given my background I can, but also because there are two popular misconceptions about comic books and the writing thereof that I'd like to do my small part to correct. To explain the first, years back I was on a convention panel with several major famous comic writers, where I meekly said, wouldn't it be great if comics were accepted by the mainstream, right alongside TV, movies, and books? A particularly famous comic book writer immediately corrected me. You can't say comics aren't mainstream. Superhero movies are earning billions. All due respect to those who have many more fans than I do, no. Just no. The only thing the success of mainstream superhero movies proves is that superheroes are mainstream. The superhero is a genre, a template for storytelling. Comics, graphic novels, sequential art, whatever term you want to use, is a medium, like television, film, or prose. While superheroes historically developed in the comic medium, you don't need comic books to tell superhero stories any more than you need superheroes to create comics. As a medium, comics can tell any type of story from any genre. Romance, horror, postmodern dubious narratives, stream of conscious odes to your calico cat, whatever. As a combination of words and pictures, comic books can do anything words and pictures can do on their own, and arguably more. The second misconception is more specific to the writing side of comics. A lot of folks both in and out of the industry think that deep down comic book writers are just frustrated artists, folks who love comics so much that they settled for the lesser role of writer just to be near them. Not everyone thinks that way, but the fact is, while no one ever assumes that I paint the covers for my novels, if someone discovers I'm a comic book writer, their most common question is, can you do a sketch for me? And the second, what do you mean you don't draw? I understand the confusion. Artwork is a huge part of the comic experience. Comic artists tend to earn more accolades, and having the rarer skill actually have an easier time finding work. Why is that skill rarer? Partly because most schools drop teaching visual communication right after kindergarten finger painting. But it's also because the writer's art, verbal storytelling, is deeply embedded in how we think. Texting, chatting, whatever, we think, breathe, and eat stories. Some professional writers take great offense when just anyone sits down and thinks they can write a story. But too bad, it's true, anyone can. Haha. Don't get me wrong, creating a story isn't the same as getting someone to pay for it. It's not even the same as getting someone to listen to it for free. Professional writing involves a wealth of practice, skill, and talent that's very much equal to the practice, skill, and talent involved in becoming an artist. Because of our basic verbal predisposition, though, a comic book artist without a writer can easily take a stab at doing their own stories. A writer without an artist, though, is stuck. There's also a common argument that great art in a comic can save lousy writing, but great writing can never save lousy art. First off, I don't know that that's true. I can easily imagine a few lines from Emily Dickinson completely saving page after page of crayon scrawl. The other problem with that argument is that it's about saving the worst, rather than creating the best. Like, combining a great artist with a great writer. Of course, not every writer becomes Dickinson, not every artist Da Vinci, or choose your own favorite, but just as words and pictures have the potential to do more together than apart, when writers and artists play to their strengths, the whole is always greater than the sum of the parts. In the end, the writer and artist are equal partners in what's really the only important part of the process, the creation of the fictive world that the reader enters. Anyway, as a result of these biases, real or imagined, practical or ego-driven, while there are tons of courses, books, and videos about drawing comics, very few focus exclusively on writing. Unlike this one, which consists of 11 exciting video lectures providing both captivating comic writing theory and a plethora of nuts and bolts, pragmatic advice and rules. Those lessons are Whys and Wherefores, which you're watching now, in which I talk about everything I've talked about up until now, including this. Comic Book Basics, in which I'll be discussing comic book formats, comic book terms like panels and splash pages, where the words go, and how to read a comic. On Reading Comics, in which we'll get under the hood a bit to talk about what makes comic books work, why they're inherently different from film or prose, and at the same time equally valid as a form of entertainment, education, and self-expression. The writer's role, which covers the mainstream comics workflow and how it influences both the way writers are paid and the way they create stories. I also discussed the two most common forms writers, artists, and editors use to collaborate, the Marvel way and the full script. Pitches, springboards, and summaries, which covers story basics, how writers pitch stories, how to fit content into that short space, and how the process of summarizing reflects two distinct but compatible writing methods. Word and art, which covers the way words and pictures change one another, what exactly constitutes a comic book, and the 7 categories of word-picture relationships described by Scott McCloud in his book, Making Comics. Panel descriptions Part 1, which covers dramatic versus physical descriptions, the visible and invisible in story design, how to use film terms in comic scripts, and how to imply panel composition without spelling it out. Panel descriptions Part 2, in which we cover what order to best present all the elements of a panel description, motivating movement between panels and pages, how much fits where, and how to choose the right panel size and subject. The words the reader sees, which covers how to write in the limited space of a panel, deal with exposition, break up dialogue for impact, the 3 ways dialogue defines character, and lastly, the limits of dialogue. Redundancy, redundancy, redundancy. If you see one lecture this year, it should be this, especially if you want to write comics. The 3 categories of redundancy I describe here will help hone your writing so that it's both effective and fits in a panel. I also discuss under what circumstances redundancy can actually be useful. And lastly, writing comics for a living, which covers formatting specs, my own experience with the industry, and the 3 basic paths between your work and the reader: mainstream comics, book publishers, and self-publishing. And that, as they say, makes a complete set. Thanks for listening so far. Any questions, feel free to get in touch through the dashboard. Meanwhile, I'll look forward to pretending to see you in the next lecture.